This is Michael Popok, and look at the lights off. It must be legal AF after dark. Joe Biden is not lame duck. Joe Biden, our president, is unshackled. Joe Biden is empowered. Joe Biden just gave 2 weeks notice and he doesn't have a care in the world except democracy. And now he's going to go forward with all the agenda items he's always wanted to do while he was in office, like reform the United States Supreme Court. And Kamala Harris, who's not only the nominee for president on the Democratic side, but the likely person we're going to be swearing in as Madam Vice President-elect. I'm sorry. See, already I have to update myself. Who's going to be sworn in as Madam President-elect come November. She's behind it too. Term limits. Put more people on the court. Ethics code. Let's have a constitutional amendment and create a new federal independent prosecutor. Joe Biden is just the president and Kamala Harris the future president to get it all done. And we break it down on Legal AF. Take a listen.
Look, I think it's very important that President Biden is taking a strong position on Supreme Court reform. I think that the overwhelming majority of American people support reforming the Supreme Court and recognize that the constituency of the Supreme Court and what they are doing, taking away our freedoms, is just simply not reflective of the American population. It is reflective of a Frankensteinian right-wing agenda of a federalist society and of, these right-wing zealots who have generationally worked to create a system where they hold back the pendulum of progress through these ridiculous and frankly despicable rulings, taking away our freedoms. They took away the woman's right to reproductive freedom. They took away Roe v. Wade. They overturned precedent after they all sat there and gave testimony saying that they were not going to do that. They lied under oath. They've taken away the separation of church and state and removed the decades-long Lemon test. They've taken away decades-long precedent regarding the ability of agencies to deal with things like securities fraud and environmental regulation. They've gutted the Civil Rights Act. They've gutted the Voting Act. They've gutted what remained of affirmative action. They've gutted everything that really was at the core of this big, beautiful, but messy place that is America, with these freedoms that we cherished and perhaps to some extent even took for granted they would always be there. And instead, they've also put in place a regime where bump stocks can proliferate, where the test of whether a gun restriction is allowed is some arbitrary view towards what would the founders say, despite the fact that there were no AR-15s there. And unless the founders would have prohibited things that didn't even exist, then they can't be regulated, which creates a test to allow the rampant proliferation of guns. So when you actually talk about issues, America actually isn't very divided, but there are points, viruses within our system that divides us. One is corporate media and right-wing propaganda. Corporate media both sides the issues. Right-wing propaganda just spews lies and hate, and they want us to be divided, talking about things like an Algerian fight against an Italian fighter in the Olympics and how the Olympics should regulate itself, and somehow that should become an issue in the presidential election. Don't forget, Fox is the one that lies about Democrats are coming for your dishwasher. Somehow Mr. Potato Head has gone woke. Apparently to them, Algeria, where it's illegal to be gay, that they've gone woke also, apparently. I mean, watching this whole bizarre wokey thing on an international stage, you wonder what the world thinks about the United States of America and how mad it's gotten. But when you focus on the issues, on gun control, on climate, on women's reproductive rights, on a living wage, on protecting Social Security, on expanding healthcare. You go through the list on equality, on LGBTQ plus rights. Americans generally are in agreement on these issues, about 70%. Yet you have these rights being gutted and eroded, and Americans being pit against Americans. The part that we focus on here, although the MeidasTouch focuses on the other aspects, here it's the intersection of law and politics. The Supreme Court's decision making running counter to the will of we the people is a problem, and President Biden is saying we need to reform that. Michael Popok, tell us about the reforms and tell us, what happens next. And ultimately, I think it's going to come down to the election, but people need to know that what's really at stake also is the Supreme Court.
Yeah, what we're watching is patriots coming together of all different parties and colors to defend democracy, all before our very eyes. It's a process. If people were wondering what President Biden was going to do for the last 6 months, getting and freeing hostages using his longstanding diplomatic and NATO relationships to accomplish that is a good start. He's going to address the war that was brought to the door of Israel. He's going to focus on Supreme Court reform. There's a lot to do for a very vibrant and focused and dedicated president like Joe Biden and that ball will be carried by Madam President Kamala Harris, who's in support, because this is the Biden-Harris administration, always was and always will be. And now will just be the Harris fill in the blank. We'll know over the weekend likely who our vice president's going to be. And what they're going to do, the two moments that kind of came together, the collision of two worlds that came together, is you got Judge Ludig, who I'm going to be interviewing for MeidasTouch and Legal AF next week, who is leading an American Bar Association initiative to have lawyers of every party and no party join together to protect democracy and at the polls. Now, I've been involved as a lawyer for the Democratic Party in election, in precincts, as a poll watcher, in courts, and I've done that, and I'll continue to do that, and I'll be doing that again down in Florida come the November 5th election on behalf of the Democrats. But Judge Ludig's initiative is broader than that. Talks about having, and he's a Republican, he's a conservative, and he's a federalist, but has decided that his patriotism and his love of country and his love of the Constitution and what he's watching with his eyes happen at the United States Supreme Court, he can't stand on the side. He can't be on the sideline. And he's got to lead that initiative. At the same time, we've seen the evolution of President Biden. President Biden, a year ago, impaneled a blue ribbon panel to get together and make recommendations about what should be done about the Supreme Court before we got all these terrible decisions, just off of the Dobbs decision 2 years ago, so to speak, reversing a constitutional right for a woman to choose and have reproductive rights and be equal to a man in this society. That panel came back with a bunch of recommendations. More Supreme Court justices, term limits on Supreme Court justices, and different things. At the time, either because President Biden didn't see the political will for it, didn't want to take on that fight, he had some other bigger fish to fry at the moment, he sort of let that moment pass. But now it's perfect because it's not lame duck. We're not watching lame duck Joe Biden. We're watching unshackled Joe Biden. Joe Biden doesn't have to worry about getting reelected Joe Biden. He was never, his leadership and love of country always overcame, and selflessness always overcame the political transactional component of also being the head of a party when you're the president, always with him. And now we're just seeing it writ large, right? Now it's just like he just burnt. I feel like Superman coming out of the telephone booth. It's just super Joe Biden, and nobody should fear him more than the Republicans. Joe Biden not have to worry about doing anything other than on the political side supporting his vice president, which he has done and will continue to do, and helping her get elected to keep the legacy of the Biden-Harris and what they accomplished in that body of work and she's not going to run away from it. I know that's the problem with the Republican argument. They think they're going to keep trying to pin the what happened during the Biden-Harris administration on Kamala Harris, and she's like, let me put it right on my chest. I want to. That's what I want. I want to embrace all of our accomplishments, and so Joe Biden now, this is the moment when he can get through a big idea, a heavy lift, like the reformation of the United States Supreme Court, term limits on Supreme Court justices, the ones that we hate and have been out of lockstep with the American people and their values, instead of been shoving down our throats Christian values and right-wing MAGA values and Federalist Society values and Project 2025 values, they'd be term limited off already if that were the case. Sotomayor might be too. So you got to, this runs both ways. Term limits, okay? More Supreme Court justices, that would be nice. Why is it 9? It's not in the Constitution. I know why there's one president. I know sort of the math around why we have as many congressmen as we have, congresspeople as we have, why we have as many senators as we have. I get that from the Constitution, but why 9? Because Chief Justice Marshall and others, we didn't always have 9. We had less in the past. We've never had more, but we've had less, I believe. So more would make them a representative body and would allow them to get in lockstep with where we are as a culture. Because as you said, Ben, and I've seen this also, this parlor trick played as well. When you line up the Republican values and their platform, and you take away and you do the same for the Republicans, and where they stand on women's rights, immigration rights, the economy, foreign policy, and everything else that matters to us, environment, things like that. And you take the labels off, right? It's like the old Coke versus Pepsi test. You just cover the cans so nobody knows what they are. They're like, that's really good. Coke drinker picking Pepsi. By a large majority, people align themselves with what ends up being the Democratic side. But when you put the labels on it, and you've got foreign powers through social media combined with the enemies within, combined with the Supreme Court pitting us at each other's throats, then it becomes, oh no, I can't vote for that. That's a Democratic position, or Democrat position, as they like to say. And so adding on more people will help. An ethics code that sticks and that applies, and so that they don't just say this ridiculous tautology that Roberts and Clarence Thomas and Alito say, which is, it's ethical because we say it's ethical. It's ethical because we did it. And you can just presume they're not the Pope. This isn't infallible Pope time. They're not infallible, obviously. So now we have this groundswell of attention because of the constant bad conduct and misconduct of the Supreme Court on the right side. On the right wing. From Clarence Thomas to Alito, even to things that Roberts has done wrong, and Gorsuch, all coming to a head here. And so packing the court with more people, which Franklin Delano Roosevelt threatened, and that's how he got his New Deal passed. Suddenly the Supreme Court, which was against the New Deal, said, we better start going along here with the president or we're going to have a problem. And so we're going to see things. So if we get the ethics code, we get the term limit, and we get more on there, that'll go a great way. I also like this other component of having it's not a fourth branch of government, but having an independent prosecutor that's independent from the executive branch that goes after future presidents and people under the executive branch, and having that codified. Now, some of this he's going to be able to do through Congress. Sure, somebody will challenge it to the Supreme Court. And some of it he's going to have to do through a constitutional amendment, which is much, much harder. But this is an important conversation to have, and what he can accomplish over the next 6 months. And if he can't accomplish it, he will lay the groundwork and the blueprint for it. And Kamala Harris has already announced that she supports this. This was developed with her consultation, and she will make it a centerpiece of her own campaign. The Supreme Court, as Elizabeth Warren recently said, is on the ballot. Just like women's rights are on the ballot, reproductive rights are on the ballot. That's all on the ballot. And that is great for the Democrats because it makes people get off the couch and vote. I'll leave it on this, Ben. One of the greatest accomplishments already of Kamala Harris is that she has excited the base in such a way that already 30% in polling, 30% more of major components of the Democratic alliance that's necessary to win an election have said they're more likely to vote now because of Kamala Harris and for Kamala Harris than before. That means Gen Z. That means other young voters. That means Black and brown voters and women voters. And I'm not saying they weren't going to support Joe Biden at the end of the day, but they are happily, enthusiastically going to be supporting and trying for us so that you and I in November are talking about Madam-elect President Kamala Harris. Welcome back. That was Legal AF. We do a podcast. We created it 4 years ago just for this moment in time. We sit at the intersection of law and politics so you don't have to. It's Wednesdays and Saturdays at 8 p.m. Eastern Time right on this YouTube channel. Help us get to 3 million. We are so close. You want to know how close? Go out and check. And while you're there, free subscribe and help us get to that magic number. We can't do this network without you. We're independent. We got no outside investors. We're building it with our bare hands with your involvement and growing organically through word of mouth. You want to help grow this Legal AF experience? Send it off to friends and family and people in your life and this clip and ask them to join us. And if you're new to Legal AF, that was an example of it. Lawyers talking about things. They know what they're talking about at the intersection of law and politics. That's Legal AF. You can join us again Wednesdays, Saturdays at 8 p.m. Eastern Time, and then on every audio podcast platform while you free subscribe to the MeidasTouch Network. Until my next Legal AF, until my next hot take, this is Michael Popok reporting. Heary, heary, Legal AF Law Breakdown is now in session. Go beyond the headlines and get a deep dive into the important legal concepts you need to know and we discuss every day on Legal AF. Exclusive content you won't find anywhere else, all for the price of a couple of cups of coffee. Join us at patreon.com/legalaf. That's patreon.com/legalaf.